Shoplifting is becoming an increasingly visible crime in our cities and in our towns. Whether it's the major supermarkets or local shops, pharmacies or the nation's beloved Greggs, every kind of retailer has felt the impact of a more brazen approach to stealing. And it's not just an impression exaggerated by online bots and right-wing culture warriors. The stats back it up too. The year to March 2025 saw the highest level of shoplifting recorded by police in England and Wales since 2003, with over 500,000 offences recorded. That's up 20% on 2024, itself a record-breaking year at the time. The problem is real, but the solution, as well as the causes, are unclear. Supermarket giant Iceland has announced that it will pay customers £1 each time they report a shoplifter in its stores, after it was revealed that the chain is losing around £20 million annually from the shoplifting crime. Government ministers have also been encouraging the public to report cases. This was Policing Minister Diana Johnson on BBC Breakfast earlier this week.
Clearly, I want people who see shoplifting to report it. In fact, I was in Hull recently in my constituency, and I was in Marks and Spencer's, and a man just came in and took a really large bunch of flowers from the flower display at the front of the shop. And I was so shocked he'd done that. I went to tell the assistant what had happened. So that kind of brazen boldness of shop theft has to stop. And shops have a role to play in that, in terms of increasing their security and making sure that items are not easily available in the way that perhaps they were in that store.
So you weren't thinking of a citizen's arrest, even though you're a policing minister?
Shocked. To be honest with you, I was so shocked at the brazen nature of him just coming in and picking the largest bunch of flowers and walking out of the store. Immediately, I went to the shop assistant to tell them what had happened. But it is unacceptable, and that's why we're clamping down in the crime and policing bill, getting rid of what the previous government introduced, which was this idea that if you stole less than £200, nothing would happen to you. You wouldn't actually face, the consequences of your crime.
Now, what Johnson says there isn't quite true. The so-called £200 rule is from the 2014 Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, a Tory Lib Dem coalition law, and it doesn't say the police shouldn't investigate what it calls low-value shoplifting. Rather, it says that that kind of shoplifting should be dealt with summarily, which means by a magistrate's court which can only impose prison sentences of up to 6 months and fines. Multiple retail chains, however, have suggested that the law has caused police to deprioritise shoplifting as a crime. And on several occasions, police have admitted that themselves, like here in 2023, and also here in 2017. The problem is wider than just retail businesses feeling a hit to their bottom line, though. Frontline staff are increasingly feeling the threat of violence when trying to intervene. According to the British Retail Consortium, 2,000 retail workers suffer incidents of physical violence or abuse every single day. Despite that risk, one Tory police boss thinks that it's the public's job to tackle these crimes. This was Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley, speaking earlier this week.
If you've got someone in your store now stealing from you, call 999. Also, ideally, try and stop them leaving. Don't just stand there and watch, which a lot of people do, which frustrates me. They push through the barrier at the tube station, the staff are doing nothing. I agree, they're not, that's terrible, but you're the idiot standing there with a mobile phone. You're not doing anything either, are you?
Barber also said this: if you're not even going to challenge people, you're not going to try and stop them, then people will get away with it. That's not just about policing, that's a bigger problem with society. People who don't do anything. You're part of the problem. So what's fueling the rise, not only in shoplifting, but also it's increasingly done out in the open? This is from The Week magazine earlier this year. The Association of Convenience Stores, which represents over 50,000 shops, says that almost half of shoplifters are repeat offenders, known as local prolifics, with drug or alcohol problems. One such offender interviewed by the BBC in 2023 was estimated to have stolen goods worth over £140,000 in 1 year. A 2018 report by the Centre for Social Justice found that drug dependency drives about 70% of all UK retail theft. Recent years have also seen an increase in organised gangs that target shops, stealing goods that are then sold on at discount prices. The rise in the cost of living, which has raised economic pressures generally and made everyday items more expensive, has almost certainly also increased such crimes. Self-checkouts in large supermarkets haven't helped either. One poll in February suggested that 37% of British adults had deliberately failed to scan an item when using self-service checkouts. These people, which have been dubbed swipers, seemingly well-intentioned patrons engaging in regular shoplifting. And retailers say that failure to police shoplifting properly has made the problem much worse. So, with all that in mind, Curtis, are you up for being a supermarket vigilante?
Unsurprisingly, my answer is no. And I was reading into it, and some were saying offer £1 from some supermarkets were doing it as well. There's apparently a policy that's being discussed, which, I mean, there's so many things to sort of come at this. The first thing is to obviously address austerity and public expenditure cuts, right? And it's kind of strange that if you even got supermarkets, right, saying, you should intervene and encourage people to do so, we've kind of outsourced policing to the market. It's very neoliberalism. I think what Commissioner Barber was saying was by the way, absolutely disgusting. It's look, for a lot of people, it's scary, right? People not get involved because they don't care. People are worried. Maybe that person does have a knife on them. Who knows? But what's really frustrating is he's calling people idiots on the phone who are apparently part of the problem, when you've just read out in your segment that drug-fueled shoplifting is a major problem. Maybe the police should stop the war on drugs. Maybe we should look at drugs like adults and start addressing it as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. Maybe we could get somewhere. At the end of the day, all roads to me lead to neoliberalism and Thatcherism, right? Over the last 45 years, we have seen a decimation of the public realm. And it's not just materially, by the way. I do think there's maybe a cohort of people who are doing sort of gang-related shoplifting, almost organized shoplifting, where maybe not every single person is completely destitute, and they might not need to do it in terms of sort of getting food on the table. But I would still blame neoliberalism, because I think that the public realm being decimated means that people are feeling alienated. And I think this toxic, poisonous ideology of individualism has really created that. We're creating a society where people don't trust other people anymore. And that is obviously, as a Marxist, I blame a lot of that on material conditions. But I do think there is a sense of, not belonging anymore. There seems to be disunity within the communities and communities wider across the nation. I mean, if you have politicians and the media, the political parties saying, we do not have a society, right? All we need to care about is yourself and your friends and family, but the rest of society doesn't matter. Then what to expect? Now, compound that with austerity, then of course you're going to get this. You're going to see a rise in crime. And of course, crime is largely down to poverty and obviously drug-related instances or people being dependent on drugs. Again, it's a health issue, not a criminal issue. But when you absolutely decimate the public realm, this is what's going to happen. Maybe also in terms of social democratic argument, if we just stop cutting our public services in terms of policing numbers, maybe they can deal with the issue. But instead, the police would rather spend the weekend locking up 500 people for holding placards for standing against the genocide, because they're the real criminals. Now, obviously, that's a really good of resources. But ultimately, and fundamentally, it is down to inequality and poverty. I mean, just to be anecdotal here for a second, when you go to the supermarket, look at how many things are behind security tags now. Like cheese. In my local Aldi, there's literal tags around cheese. There's meats, baby formula. And you need to look at that and really reflect on where we are in society, right? A lot of crime and a lot of shoplifting is obviously down to the fact that the state and the economy doesn't adequately provide for your average person. And politicians and the police are not interested in that, not really, because you have to fundamentally change society. You have to fundamentally change the economy. And that might mean upsetting, some of your corporate owners, because maybe you want to add a wealth tax so we can create a more equal society and redistribute wealth and power. These are big decisions that the politicians don't want to do. And the result is far more reactionary policies. I mean, you've seen Reform and Nigel Farage in the last couple of weeks saying, we are a lawless country. He's now got his next talking point. He's going to come down hard on crime, which I get confused by Reform. Either we're lawless or you get locked up for a tweet. So I'm not quite sure which one they're going to go with, but they throw a lot of shit and it sticks somewhere. So they're happy to say we need to put more money in policing, even if they're not even really doing it. But they want to sound tough on crime. And not to sound like Tony Blair here, but he did say tough on the causes of crime too. We've kind of forgot even that first bit. We're just looking at the results from it. But ultimately, if you look at the wider society, you have to change it radically. And it's not a short answer. And unfortunately, one of our sort of ills of our political system is we vote in a general election every 5 years, and people sort of expect instant results. But if you've had 45 years of neoliberal economics and individualism, you can't fix that in 5 years. Now, this is not me defending Labour, by the way, because I think they've been awful within the year they've done already. They don't have the ideas, or they don't even want to change society radically. But obviously, media pundits do want sort of a quick answer, when really we need to be looking at 10, 15, 20 years of structural change, of dealing with inequality, of dealing with poverty, of rebuilding the public realm so people feel as if they're part of a community and society. And we need to deal with the drug problem, which is not to wage war on drugs, but treat it as a health issue. When we start investing in people and have a more compassionate society, you're going to see less and less of these acts happening. But no one seems to be interested.
I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I could not have said it better myself, right? What's that? Like, the base informs the superstructure. Wow, if only someone had thought of such a thing many centuries ago at this point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you have a society where we fundamentally think that everyone should be acting in their own rational self-interest, right? Well, of course, people are not going to care about anybody else. That's the selfishness, the greed that was taught to be good as a kind of tenet of Thatcherism, right? And fundamentally, a lot of people who engage in kind of petty crime have no stake in society. And that's the problem. The whole point of the state is to make sure people have that stake in society. The Thatcher argument, you should get rid of the state, give people property, and they'll have a property-owning democracy, and that will give them the stake in society. But of course, that never worked because all of that got subsumed by the capitalist class. The rich people had much more leverage within the market, were able to subsume all of the kind of the property-owning democracy of the people who own the council houses. Then they got sold to landlords. If you look at things like the stocks that were sold from the privatized industries, like the Don't Tell Sid stuff, that was all subsumed by people like private equity buying out people's stakes so they could afford to survive. And it's led to people who have no ownership of their own lives, no ownership of their own stuff, and no ownership of their own workplace. If we want to give people more of a stake in society and feel like the society is going to be there for them and vice versa, there has to be a new social contract. And for there to be a social contract in the first place, we have to ditch the ideology, as you rightly point out, that says that such a social contract cannot exist, which is why it's so ironic that people like Robert Jenrick, who does all these videos about the social contract and petty crime, have been part of the foundational ideology that caused that to happen in the first place. Talk about egg on your face.